and I am amazed at your capacity to draw. I see 141 participants listed here. That's pretty impressive for a late on a Wednesday night. So I've been asked to talk about the legal constitutional implications of this pandemic and the lockdown for religious worship. And in a sense, this is a new thing. We have had pandemics before, but we've never had lockdowns of this extent, and we've never had what amounts to a shuttering of churches, synagogues, mosques. You have it across the spectrum. I'm going to talk about some principles of constitutional law that apply, but please don't misunderstand that there's no rule book out there. There are no right answers. It's what I'm going to be talking about are principles that provide a framework for debate and argumentation and decision making, rather than cut and dry principles that are that are just simply going to be enforced. And I want to begin with three, I think, fundamental propositions. One, and I think this is what the Archbishop was alluding to, is that despite our constitutional promise of free exercise of religion and non-establishment, which we sometimes describe as the separation between church and state, there is no absolute separation, and the state has significant regulatory authority, even as it touches religious activity. And this is especially true in a time of emergency like a pandemic. It's perhaps a tribute to the public health situation in the United States that our leading precedent on this topic from the United States Supreme Court is now over a century old. It's a case called Jacobson versus Massachusetts, and it arose in the context of a smallpox epidemic, and the state of Massachusetts required its citizens to become vaccinated. And some had objections to this. Some of those were religious objections, and the Supreme Court held that the state did have the constitutional authority to require everyone to get their smallpox vaccination. Now, this case was decided, as I say, 100 years ago, at a time well before the explosion of civil liberties litigation in the Supreme Court. It's, I think, doubtful that the court would say it exactly what it said then, but it does still exist as a precedent in the lower courts. I think every single lower court decision in the last few weeks about the coronavirus shutdowns has cited Jacobson as a precedent. And let me just read you a few sentences from a recent court, but summarizing Jacobson. The bottom line is this: when faced with a society-threatening epidemic, a state may implement emergency measures that curtail constitutional rights, so long as the measures have at least some real or substantial relation to the public health crisis, are not, quote, beyond all question, a plain, palpable invasion of rights secured by fundamental law. So that is a very pro-government standard to start with. So that's the first proposition: is the church is subject to the regulatory public health authority of the state.